everybody. This is Antidem of antidem.wordpress.com, and I'm back again for a casual conversation with old friend of the blog, Psycho Dish.
Hi, y'all.
And our topic of discussion today is a little unusual, nothing political or anything like that. Recently, I was in Las Vegas, and I met up with a friend from overseas, a girl, 24 years old, young, white, and pretty, who was there for bartending school, and at some point, she said, you know what would be really fun for me to do? Is to move to America and become a cab driver. And I turned to her and I said, you keep listening, because the next time I talk to Psycho Dish, he and I are going to record a conversation on why you becoming a cab driver is a really, really, really stupid idea.
We can start here. Cab drivers die. And they don't die of old age. They die of getting shot, stabbed, raped. Yeah, that's a good start.
So I would imagine that you have some rather colorful stories from your 35 or so years of cab driving.
Yeah, let's start here. The year that I stopped driving full-time in Oakland, you can go back to the Oakland Tribune and to the papers at the time. It would have been mid to late 80s. There was a 6-hour police chase where the guy getting chased had murdered the cab driver, stolen the cab, and took off on a police chase and killing spree in which about half a dozen people died, including the driver that he shot.
And that was about it for you?
No, I had already quit driving, and I watched this in the comfort of my home, TV news. But I was very happy to be at home watching this on TV and not in a cab that day.
Now, that said, you have driven since, right?
I will be driving this weekend.
For
Napoleon cab.
But we could say maybe that's the point where you stopped thinking of yourself as a cab driver. It's just kind of something you did as a sideline when everything else didn't work out.
Yeah. Because Oakland in the 80s was quite brutal. People were getting killed and robbed a lot. And it was more usual to hear about cab drivers getting hurt than it was to hear about cab drivers that managed to stay out of trouble. I got to give it to Richmond. Richmond is a pretty good place to be a cab driver, but it is not less dangerous. Napoleon Cab had a driver murdered this year.
I remember seeing that on the news.
So anybody that's thinking about cab driving as a trade, it's brutal. It is still brutal. It's not so brutal in Richmond, but it is still brutal.
Now, you had a cab stolen once, didn't you?
Early in my career, yeah.
So I recall this story, but if you would favor our listeners with this.
Oh my God! No, the third and final robbery. Right? No. So, okay. Pick your city in America. Pick your neighborhood where there are more criminals than regular people, where bar fights are pretty much every night, and whatever that street is and whatever that bar is, that the cops know it on a first name basis. That's the kind of bar that I pulled up in front of with my cab, keys in the ignition, in park, while the guys that were formerly in the bar were beating up a homeless person, stealing his $2.25 that he'd begged earlier. It really wasn't about his $2.25, it was just beating up a homeless person. I tried to walk into the liquor store adjacent to the bar, buy a 12-pack of beer, and make it back into my cab with the beer and my money and the cab. Now, if you're a bad guy beating up a homeless person over $2.25, and there's a cab driver with a 12-pack of beer, a cab, and presumably some amount of money in his pockets, this is a hugely better option. A stupid criminal would let that cab driver get into his car and leave. These were not stupid criminals. They punched me, told me what they were taking, and said if I fought them, they would fight back. Now, they'd just been beating up a homeless person, so it was pretty obvious that I was going to lose the fight, and the beer, and the money, and the car. And I did.
So, I guess we can presume where the beer and the money ended up. What happened to the car?
It was sold for parts, and best tradition of the ghetto. We found the remains of it up on cinder blocks a few blocks away in one of the housing projects.
And was this Taxi Unlimited, or?
This was Diane Wallace's Taxi. The particular car was a Dodge Polara that Diane had found, which had, if you know anything about Mopar, it had a particularly desirable 360 V8 in it, which is for the hot rodders, an engine they like. It had a transmission that was also valuable on the street if you're customizing cars. It had four-wheel disc brakes, which again is another thing that the hot rodding people are really happy about. So it had all these performance parts that if it was stripped and sold were worth money.
And it was stripped and sold?
Absolutely.
Now, I recall another story where you had a workmate who was not quite robbed. He managed to...
Oh, Joe Seward. Yeah.
So somebody gets in his cab
Mm-hmm.
and pulls some sort of weapon.
Yeah.
Which was what now?
Which was air pistol, actually.
An air pistol. And Joe was not exactly...
He was drunk.
He was drunk. Okay. And anything else in his bloodstream or just alcohol?
Just alcohol.
So Joe looks at him
and says, "Fuck you. You're going in the hospital and I'm going to jail."
And that's pretty much what happened.
They both went to jail. Yeah.
So the cops show up.
They weren't sure what to do because Joe had the air pistol. He had the guy on the ground. He was beating the thief. And he was screaming drunkenly at the thief that the thief was going into the hospital. So there were multiple crimes committed, starting with the thief pulling the gun and asking for money.
And when the cops got a good smell of Joe's breath...
It was pretty much a done deal.
Yeah. He might not have gone to jail if not for that.
Well, and the little problem of him beating up the thief, I mean, that's kind of an issue.
Yeah, though that could be passed off as self-defense.
True.
Reeking of SoCo while you're driving a cab.
That's a problem.
So, and there was a lot of substance abuse.
Well, Oakland in the 80s, the drug cartels pretty much ran the cab business. Except for Diane Wallace's Taxi. And part of the reason why she went out of business is she would not play ball with the drug cartels. But Bay Area Cab, Friendly Cab, Yellow Cab, Yellow Checker, Red Top Cab, all of them were corrupt. All of them were taking money from the drug cartels.
Some of these companies are still around, aren't they?
Some of them are.
But no longer...
Right, no, they had to shed their organized crime connections.
So the cycle starts with a cab driver maybe snorting some cocaine and going, "This is great. This is going to keep me up all night. I'll make all kinds of money."
Right, and then he needs more. And then he gets behind on all his bills, everything. And then the local cartels are like, we can help you. You just need to do a little favor for us. So he'll get a package or he'll get a courier, somebody who rides in his cab with a delivery. And it's a regular cab ride. You pick them up, you take them where they're going, you drop them off. But of course, it's a drug cartel thing. Wink and a nod. We are an hotel motel. I don't know who you are, and I don't know what's on your person or what's in that box you got in your lap. I just know I'm supposed to take you somewhere, and that's the end of it.
So this seems a little bit sort of darker natured than the somewhat more disorganized drug running out of Taxi Unlimited.
Taxi Unlimited was actually a front for the Humboldt County marijuana growers. That's the reason they had money. They were the transport service, the trucking service for Humboldt County.
Which, it didn't start out that way, though.
No, it didn't. It started out legit, but by the time I got there, the dominant cadre in the collective were all in some way connected to Humboldt County and to marijuana farming.
Which, this being the early 80s in Northern California, though, that's somewhat more lighthearted than some of the stuff that the cartels would do to you if you crossed them.
Yeah, well, if you crossed the cartel, if they didn't kill you, the first thing they would do is take your cab, But the style, the way they did it is they left you bare naked. You didn't have anything, not even the socks. And you had to find your way to people naked and let them know that everything had been taken from you, and you obviously needed clothing to start with and much more.
Now, Oakland these days, I mean, there's still some crime in Oakland, but it's pretty much 90% of the crime takes place in two neighborhoods. But these were the days when it was a much rougher town than it is now.
Acorn, the political activist group, they had a housing project that was corrupt, and
Wait, Acorn corrupt? No.
wow, they were forced out of business. They had to sell that. They had to sell that housing project because it was so badly corrupt. They had their own private security force that was beating people up. They had their own private security force that was selling drugs and competing with the drug cartels. There were a lot of murders that boiled down to Acorn trying to control their territory and the drug cartels trying to kill them and take over.
And this was everywhere in Oakland. I mean, you even told me a story about Oakland Chinatown and the tongs there and this father who got into some trouble with gambling debts.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, you have different factions. You have East Oakland and a particular drug lord who controlled East Oakland. You have West Oakland and Acorn and the turf war that went on between Acorn and the drug cartels. And you have Chinatown, which was the triad gangs and their whole enterprise. I don't know how it is now, but there was a lot going on. There was a lot of crime, a lot of corruption.
So this father gets, I mean, these was the days when there were lots of illegal gambling dens. And by the way, if you guys don't know anything about Oakland Chinatown, so there's San Francisco Chinatown, which is very touristy, and, you walk through the big gate and all of that, and you're perfectly safe there. Won't be any problem at all. There's businesses that cater to tourists, and people stand out there hawking restaurants and all that, and that's fine. Although in every Chinatown there is the big street with the gate where the tourists go, and then there's the street just off it, which is where the Chinese go.
Right.
Although these days there's also a second complete Chinatown in San Francisco out in the Richmond district.
Yes.
And that's, these days, sort of the Chinatown everyone knows is sort of the tourist Chinatown. Then the second Chinatown out in the Richmond district is the Chinatown that the Chinese people go to.
Yep.
Then there's Oakland Chinatown, which is completely different and not very touristy at all.
It's dirty. It's 24/7.
Yeah, this is, on a rainy night, it's pretty Blade Runner.
Yeah.
So, this would have been, 93, 94 or so. Father gets into the triad for some big gambling debt and has a daughter down at, San Jose State or something? Might have even been
I don't know.
Berkeley. The one where they found her up in the hills after a week or two of being missing.
Yes. They had a very clean professional hit, and they found her in the hills.
And the triad, after a little while, contacts the father and says, your debts are gone, go in peace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But everybody got the message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cab drivers exist in the lower third of the bell curve. We serve people who, at that point in their lives, don't have a better option than a cab. If their lives were different, they could afford a car, they could afford bus fare, they could afford something else. Something has transpired in their life such that, at this moment, they have no option other than Uber or a cab.
Or back in the old days, not even Uber.
Or back in the old days, not even Uber. So you're not dealing with somebody who is in a good place in their life. The other reason, it's still the bottom third, because the other crowd that we deal with are the ones that want to go out and misbehave. They want to go to a bar and misbehave. They want to go to a club and misbehave. Whatever. They want to go out and do something that means that they shouldn't be behind the wheel.
Now, this runs up against your two rules of cab driving.
Shut up and pay.
And, by the way, pay is the number one on that list.
Yes.
Shut up is somewhat negotiable.
Yes.
But pay is not negotiable.
Pay is not negotiable. If pay is in question, you're getting out of the cab. And I would give that advice to your friend and to any other cab driver. If you are at all in doubt about pay, stop the car, get the son of a bitch out of the fucking car. And don't ask, would you please get out? No, it's the way I said it. Fucking get out of my car. God damn it.
So did you have to kick many people out over the years?
About 3 weeks ago.
Really?
Yeah, I got called a few things. Cracker, racist. Yeah, asshole, that was one.
So there would be a certain pattern to the profile of the individuals in question?
There is a behavioral chess game, a behavioral dance that goes on that boils down to they're looking for a docile driver. They're looking for a driver that they can manipulate. So the crucial thing that you must not do is, and especially if you're a woman, do not lose this fight. This is not a physical fight. This is a mental chess game, a mental judo that's going on. It happens very fast, and you're either going to win this one, and the ride will go the way you need it to go, or you're going to lose and get hurt.
You got to establish your dominance?
Yes, but it's a service business, so the way you establish your dominance isn't through masculine strength, actually. It's through cunning and smarts.
So how many times have you said you've been robbed 3 times?
Yeah.
In a cab. And that's it?
That's it.
You know, in 30-something years, that's not too bad.
It's very good, and my lucky streak is kind of awesome. I'm back to having a really good job, so I'm getting out of cab driving this fall again. I'm going to stop.
Well, that's happened before.
Yeah. That's the advice I would give to her and to everybody. Win the chess game. Win the mental dance that goes on with the customer.
So how do you do that?
If they're aggressive, they've just given you permission to be evil and disruptive. And you now get to have fun with this. You don't have to behave like a normal person. Within reasonable boundaries. I don't want anybody getting arrested. I don't want anybody doing anything criminal. But if you understand the limits, you understand the confines of the situation, there's a whole lot you can do that will just weird out somebody. Just make them go, pull over, let me out. Which is, yeah, awesome. Absolutely.
Like what?
Well, in the particular case of this guy who cussed me out, I picked him up at the Omni Hotel. By the way he was dressed and so on, I knew that he wasn't a customer of the Omni. The customers of the Omni look nice in a particular way. So I knew that, and then the way he was walking, he wasn't walking in a calm way. He was in a hurry to get out of there, which means I'm fairly sure the Omni told him, get in that cab or cops and that kind of thing. So I knew right away I was pretty much doing the Omni a favor, even if I took him around the block just to get him away from the door of the Omni. He gets in the car, and one of the things that's in our advantage as cab drivers is our deep inside knowledge of the city. He tells me, I want to go to the McDonald's on Brooklyn Park Boulevard. Now, the world is not going to know that there's no McDonald's on Brooklyn Park Boulevard. If you really care, go Google it. You'll see what I'm talking about. There is one on Chamberlain Avenue, and it's about a $10 ride. Now, I know this. He doesn't necessarily know this, but this is the kind of thing, because we do this day in and day out. We do this 60 hours a week. We know things like this that help us. And it's what makes beginning cab drivers kind of at a disadvantage, because you don't have the knowledge yet. So I knew he was full of shit, and I said, you mean the McDonald's on Chamberlain Avenue? And he mumbled at me. I'm not happy about mumbles, people. If you're cool, you can speak in complete sentences and so on. So we headed up East Main Street. I was headed to Belvederes, or Cord, and I was going to turn right on Cord and to Belvedere on up to Chamberlain. And he started off in the front seat. He crawled over the front seat into the back seat, sat behind me, which is a no-no, because that's the strong. If you're going to attack a cab driver, you want to sit directly behind him, because he can't get to you. So, sat behind me, which now I'm really antenna up. I'm really paying attention to this guy. He then shifted over to the far right side of the seat in the passenger in the back, and mellowed out for the ride, but he kept doing something else, which again is an attempted dominance. He kept saying, turn left here, turn left here, turn left here. Sorry for pounding on the table. Turn left here. No, turn right here. Which, if you hear the tone of voice, the aggression and so on, if you're intimidated by that and then you do it, you're sunk. You've just lost the game. What you have to do is keep your head, and you already have a destination in mind. Chamberlain Avenue, McDonald's, keep going to that destination. Now, this is already a problem for him because he gave you a bogus address. You picked an address that you want to go to that's close. So he's already lost one of the moves in this chess game, and you've won a couple because he got in the car, he mellowed out, we're going where you said we're going, and his attempts at disrupting you by saying turn left or turn right or no, I want to go here are failing. You're not doing it. You're not compliant. You're not being rude. You are taking him somewhere. The meter is running. You're doing your job. But you're not falling for this turn left, turn right crap. Get to Chamberlain Avenue. The final thing is, well, can I just give you $5? No, it's a $9.50 fare, fucker. You can't just give me $5. Well, what am I supposed to do? Get out of my cab. You can't tell me that. Hell yeah, I can. Get the fuck out of my cab. Well, you're an asshole. Yes? Get out of my cab. What am I supposed to do about the money? I don't give a fuck. Get out of my cab. So he got out. End of it.
So it is literally your way or the highway.
Yeah.
So what is the outright scariest thing? Or maybe even the top two that you saw driving a cab?
This was also early in my career. It was leaving the Amtrak station that's now closed at 16th and Wood in Oakland, and driving slowly because at that time that just leaving the train station, the roads were really bad, and having a completely naked woman run up to the cab, put her hands on the door, and I thought I was going to run over her, and tell me that she was being raped and I needed to get help. Freaked me out, and I regret to this day that I didn't just let her in the car and then figure it out later. I rolled out the window and kept going. I did not know what the hell was going on.
Well, that could be some kind of ambush too.
It could be. I don't know to this day. I pray to God that woman got help and she survived it. But that was just this apparition appearing out of nowhere.
Well, what's the second scariest thing?
The 15-minute fight I had early in the second robbery. The 15-minute fight I had in my career where they were trying to kill me.
So how did this start?
They wanted to rob me. There's two of them.
Well, were they in the cab or?
Yeah. Acorn. I picked him up in Acorn.
Oh, yeah, okay. So you picked them up at the Acorn Projects and they wanted to go
to the Acorn Projects. Around the corner.
Ah. That's your first clue.
Yeah. It's interesting about Richmond. Napoleon, most of our money at Napoleon is in what are called the courts, in the public housing projects here in Richmond. And there seems to be a tacit agreement that Napoleon's drivers are off limits. If you live in courts, you don't mess with the cab driver. You don't hurt him. You pay your money. You behave yourself. So which I'm appreciative.
Except for the incident earlier this year.
From the hotel. Earlier this year.
The Napoleon getting a driver killed.
Well, no, he was not picked up in one of the courts, though.
Okay, now, do I remember something about him just being like a crazy person? Like some kind of serial killer, or was it a robbery?
No, that was just a straight up murder. He just plain shot the driver. And by the way, please, no one ever do this, but if you want to be successful as a robber, you need to be a serial killer. The right way to rob a cab driver is to murder first, steal later. But please, I know this is going out on the internet. I'm not saying I want people to do this. I don't want people going to prison, and I don't want to hear from the family of a driver who was the victim of somebody who thought, oh, this is a plan. I'll do this.
I trust that my listeners are only the best sorts of people.
I hope so. By the way, if you imagine that this could go well for you, I hope you rot in prison.
So anyhow, you pick up two gentlemen of questionable provenance, and they want you to take them on a cab ride around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And how long did it take before things started getting violent?
Not long. They had me pull into a parking lot and park, and they pulled a knife, and we started fighting over the knife.
And how did it end up?
I had a big cut in my scalp where they tried to stab me, and the knife was bent into a 90-degree bend. This was a kitchen knife. This is a knife that they didn't believe could be bent. It's wonderful what adrenaline will do to the human body, the things you can do under the power of adrenaline.
And you got to invest in a nice knife, a Kershaw or a Benchmade or a Cold Steel
Dollar
or something
store.
like that. Yeah, well, criminals tend not to invest in very good equipment.
This was dollar store.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you actually took me in the cab one night around, 1995,
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Ish. And it was a slow night. Not much happened. The one thing I do recall is that we ended up picking up someone at an apartment complex in Oakland and taking them to which airport, I forget. And by odd coincidence, you actually ended up moving into that same apartment building a year or two later.
Oh, Vernon Street. Okay, yeah.
But, a lot of nights driving the cab are just going to be slow, boring, nothing going on. Lots of sitting there listening to KGO.
Lots of sitting there listening to KGO. The cab business has changed. The old FM radios, the old analog world of FM radios and mechanical meters and so on that I learned to drive a cab in is gone. What you have now is a silent cab that's dispatched through an app, a tablet and an app. So the dispatchers, there's no...
it's not like Louis De Palma sitting there in a cage going, Rhea, take car 5 over to 5th and Main.
Right, no. There's a an Android tablet and there's an app, and you learn of your fare through the tablet and the app.
And with a lot of these, they pay through the app, right? So you don't actually ever see any money.
Right.
So is it better or worse?
It's better.
So what do you think about the idea that one of these days driverless cabs are going to replace the whole thing?
It has happened repeatedly through history. There will be a niche market for human-driven cabs, and it'll be more about the experience of the human-driven cab. And the guys and gals that do this will have to understand that what people are buying is the experience of that human-driven cab.
So you show up in a suit with a cap and white gloves in a nice town car.
It becomes theater at that point. It becomes something like an art car, like a Tax Unlimited art car with a driver that's wearing pink lensed glasses and dressed in costume.
Now wait a second, you never told me about this.
No, I'm saying, I'm describing something that could work as a marketing thing. Yeah, you can ride a human-driven hippie cab. That's the kind of thing that will go on. It'll be a small boutique thing, a specialty thing. If you're just trying to get somewhere, you'll just order.
If Tyrone and Jamal want to ride to Arby's, it's going to be in the driverless cab.
It's going to be in the driverless cab, right?
So nobody to rob.
Right.
Nobody to annoy.
Right.
Better or worse?
Even. If you're just trying to get somewhere, it doesn't matter. I'm just a machine operator. If you want some sort of an experience with the cab driver, that's where you get into trying to design a cab and a driver and a whole thing. This is something above and beyond just get me where I'm going.
The whole experience thing doesn't exactly sound like it would be your thing.
I want to be doing something else.
The Psycho Dish Cab experience can be described as crusty, grizzled, irascible.
Are you going to pay me? Good. Okay, shut up.
But there are good experiences too, aren't there?
Yeah.
It's hard to think of one.
Well, no, I'm trying to think of one more recent.
Well, you can think of them from the old days too. And trust me, people love stories about Oakland from the bad old days.
I had a carload of guys drive me from East Oakland, one of the housing projects that was controlled by one of the drug dealers, all the way up to Richmond, California, to the unincorporated part of Richmond. They had me parked. There was a sentry on guard duty on a public street with an AK-47. They told me, stay put. We'll keep somebody in the car with you, but please don't do anything stupid. They were gone for an hour. So they'd run up quite a tab by this point. I didn't know if they were coming back or not. But I waited them out, and they came back, and they went all the way back to East Oakland. It was a shitty night. I hadn't made any money to speak of. And this one ride, terrifying ride, made my night.
And that's the good story?
Yeah.
So was it the guy with the AK-47 who got into the cab with you?
No, he stayed. He was a sentry. But no, I think at one point he came up to the window and said, just wait, you'll be okay.
Wow. That'll get your attention.
Yeah. I don't know. All my favorite cab experiences have to do with opportunities to serve somebody. Somebody who's caught out, who really needs a cab ride, who I already know I ain't getting paid for this. But I go ahead and do it.
Well, attitude does count for a lot.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, this is a little bit shameless, but hotness counts too.
Yeah. Hey, let's just say it like it is.
If you're young and pretty and you have a story, you have a shot at getting a free ride.
So what is the most money you ever made on a single ride?
That was the cocaine psychotic guy who pulled up to Center and Shattuck to the BART station in Berkeley in his car, got out of his car, left it running, and said that aliens were invading his brain and the cops were following him and I needed to drive him to Walnut Creek.
That's got to be a good half an hour?
Easy. I said I wanted $100 up front. He gave me $200.
Now we've got your attention.
Okay then! And we get 2/3 of the way to Walnut Creek. He says, no, turn around, we've been followed. And I swear to God, we did the 4 compass directions. We went as far east as he dared. We went as far west as you can in San Francisco, out to the Great Highway. We went up to Marin County. We went south to the South Bay, and we finally looped our way back around to Berkeley at about 3 in the morning with, I think, $300 or $400 on the meter, where I dropped him at a no-tell motel, and he paid.
You didn't take him back to his car?
No, he didn't want to go back to his car because it was infested with aliens.
Maybe illegal aliens.
It could have been.
Jesus and Carlos there, and I bet you they took that to the chop shop.
Yeah. Well, there was a Ford Fairmont wagon. It was a piece of POS card.
So was that also the weirdest ride you've ever had?
Mary Garst.
Yeah, so we've told it now. Did we tell the story about the apple tree?
No, Berkeley Hills pecan tree,
which belonged to a professor at Berkeley.
Yes, nice house.
Who Mary knew how?
Through her family, the Garst family. The Garst family had money.
So, just to recap, now this was the early 80s.
Yes.
And she was from a very wealthy, prominent local family.
Yes.
And had decided to drink all of that money away, except for the part that went up her nose. And
yeah, no, she was trying to spend her way through her inheritance, which was substantial, but she was trying really hard to make sure she had none of it.
And pretty much all of it going into intoxicants and partying and...
Yeah, 7 Deadly Sins was a bucket list for her.
So So she gets in your cab and
announces that she will pay me an obscene amount of money. I think it was a couple $1,000. If I would go with her to Berkeley Hardware, she would buy an axe, and we would drive to this professor's house, and I would publicly chop down this guy's tree with the axe for $2,000.
Now, what time of day was this?
Midday, 2 in the afternoon.
So not even under cover of darkness?
No.
And you didn't accept this one?
No.
And just didn't want the trouble?
I'm not doing anything other than taking you where you want to go and getting money from you. The rest of it, go to hell.
So, what percentage of the rides you give would you say you ever feel like you're in any danger in?
Oh, geez. Under 1%.
Now, is that now, or was that back in Oakland in the old days?
Well, I had the bravado of youth working for me back then, so I think it was still about that.
But a somewhat different scale.
Yeah. It's a lovely thing about being 20-something. You think you are Atlas or Zeus or somebody. Hercules.
Or Xena.
Well, yeah.
And that's the customers. There were a lot of burnouts and shady people driving the cabs.
Still. Yeah. So, for your 24-year-old young and pretty bartender, I want to talk about a Napoleon driver who died this year. He didn't get shot. He died of complications related to cocaine addiction. But this is what I want to talk about for her. Wayne died because he got locked into a 24-hour lifestyle that he could not escape. It became a trap for him. He lived and died every day. Every 24 hours, he needed the same thing. He needed his drugs, he needed a hotel room, he needed something to eat. He couldn't really afford medical care. He was an addict, so he couldn't really, getting medical care was a problem. He was in his 50s and had the usual 21st century middle-aged male health problems that a lot of us have, diabetes and heart disease, and the speech from the doctor about stop eating all that crap and get yourself to the gym. Because Wayne was caught in this 24-hour cycle, every 12 hours when he went into the cab, he had to get a certain amount of money, or he was going to be homeless that day. He would not be able to pay for his hotel room. He wouldn't be able to buy the drugs he needed. And this trap is something that is so easy to fall into as a cab driver. You get locked into this rhythm where you're constantly trying to feed a monkey that can't be sated, can't be fulfilled. Wayne's particular cycle devolved down to a day cycle, where every day he had to make his hotel, every day he had to make his food, every day he had to make his drugs. But I've seen guys that are involved in a 7-day cycle. They work 7 days a week because they're trapped into the cycle. If they don't get the money they need in 7 days, they're fucked. And this is what kills cab drivers, more than the crime, more than the sensational stories about robberies and people like Mary Parker and so on. This is what kills cab drivers. It's the grind that you get into that just wears your health down, puts you in the hospital repeatedly, and eventually takes you out. You can't ever accumulate enough money to do something like a 401k or any kind of investment savings. You're always chasing the next 7 days, and I have to pay I have to pay something, right? There's always this thing that if you don't do this today, you're going to be fucked. When you're 24 and just getting started, you don't realize yet that you're being sucked into something that is going to eventually trap you and you won't be able to get out. That's much more pernicious and deadly than anything that would make the TV news.
And I'd imagine he was not the first person that you saw something like this happen to.
No, I've seen a lot of people get pulled into this, and it takes about 2 to 5 years, but it will kill you.
So there's a certain toughness you had to develop to not fall into it.
Yeah.
but it's hard to do.
It's hard to do. The problem with cab is that it's fast money. When I go work a cab shift, I'm walking off the lot with Benjamins, with multiple $100s in revenue. It's the discipline that you have to put on yourself is to realize that is gross revenue, that money is committed or allocated to various things in your life, including the cost of operating that cab, cost of taking care of yourself. The cab drivers, the small minority of cab drivers that get wealthy off of cab driving, treat it like a small business, and they deposit the gross revenue that they take in over each shift gets deposited into a business checking account, and they've got themselves a small business accounting program like QuickBooks or whatever, and they behave themselves in terms of budgeting and managing that business like a business, adhering to good accounting principles and good small business practices. The guys that do that, or the gals that do that, can accumulate wealth, can get to a point where they will be financially stable. What too many of us get sucked into is we are worried about the need in front of our face. We realize we have a couple $100 in our face, and we want beer, we want alcohol, we want drugs, we want sex, we want various 7 deadly sin things. And it's so easy to go get that because you've got the money in your pocket and arrive at the cab lot the next morning behind the 8 ball. You had a good time last night, but now all of a sudden that money that could have gone into the business checking account and into something responsible, you don't have it. So now you have to go hustle and get it again, and then it just kind of pulls you in.
And it sounds like the kind of thing where you're surrounded by people with high time preference, poor impulse control. So, if you're in a room full of crazy people, it's hard to not get crazy.
Yeah.
If everyone in the cab driving business was going home doing exactly what you just talked about, it'd be easier for you to do it too.
Right.
But that's just not how it is.
No, it's not how it is. Not at all.
Was it worse back in the old days than it is now?
Oakland at that time was a brutal place. Not just for the cab drivers, but for a lot of people. It was a really ugly place. If you didn't live in Montclair or up above College Avenue or in the nicer parts of Oakland, Oakland was a tough place to try to make a go of it.
Now, I would imagine probably around the same time if you were driving, in San Jose or something, it wouldn't have been that big a problem.
Well, again, and I think this is something that cab drivers come to know. There are spots in every city where there's an infestation of ugliness, of bad people and trouble and toil and everything else. Most of the city is fine. In fact, most of the people in those bad places are fine. It's just a tiny minority that gets all the attention. Deservedly so, because they really belong in prison.
So how many times did you ever have to call the cops when you were driving?
Not that often.
Well, of course, this was also the days before cell phones, so...
Well, one of the choices I make as a cab driver is one that gets me in trouble with the cab company. For me to prosecute you for not paying, for trying to rob me, for doing something other than getting in, paying me, getting out, I have to give up maybe 4 to 6 hours of my shift. I have to give up a substantial chunk of my shift to dealing with the police. I like to average, in Richmond, the cost of living is a little cheaper. I like to average $25, maybe $30 an hour. So at $25 an hour, we're talking $100 in revenue or more. That's pretty much all my earnings for the shift. You're not just costing me $10 for your stupid fare. You're costing me the time in service pulling in cash flow.
Right, because you got to pay for the car, right?
I got to pay for the car, and once I walk off the lot, I have things I need that money for. So my choice is, do I give you $100, $150 in lost time to pursue a criminal investigation with you, or do I cuss you out, throw you out, and go back to making money? And the cab company doesn't like it, because if you get a reputation as being like that, somebody that they can run out on or not pay. The fear is that people will take advantage of that. Yeah, come to Richmond, get in my cab, and see what it's like when I start to cuss you out.
I'll bet you were quite inventive.
It's not free. If I haven't made you think that I'm evil, I'm being too nice.
So it's not particularly a incredibly lucrative job either, which is why a lot of the people involved in it probably dealt drugs on the side.
Yeah, Oakland definitely. Oakland, I don't think the drivers were breaking minimum wage at the time.
So you, at least when you were working for Taxi Unlimited, you were living, what, under the porch?
Well, that's what made it economically feasible, because I was squatting, yeah. I didn't have any bills.
Was this Taxi Unlimited's porch, or...?
No, it was our landlord's porch.
Okay, so he had a big porch, and then you could crawl underneath it, and how many people were living down there? Just
there was the house itself was on piers, and the crawl space was about 6 foot tall. So you could stand up in the crawl space under the house. But it was a crawl space. It wasn't a basement. It wasn't improved to the point where it was livable.
But you lived down there anyway.
Yeah.
So you had a bed and a TV set, or what?
No TV. I had a bed, and I rigged together a desk that would fold away so that it didn't look like a desk. You had to be careful about looking like you were occupying a space that wasn't living space.
And it was just you, or there were more people too?
There were a few people.
This all sounds very California in the old days.
Yeah. And
they were not very reputable personages, I would assume.
Well, by whose standards? They were.
The standards of a pretty 24-year-old girl who wants to get into cab driving.
No, they were scum.
Sex, drug use.
Oh yeah.
Drunken arguments.
Yes. Drunken fights, sure.
So how long were you down there?
A year, 2 years.
Now, did Catherine, your grandmother, not ex-communist, I think she went to her grave with her card-carrying member card still in her purse, but she threw you out?
Multiple times.
So, was this the first time or one of the subsequent times?
This is one of the subsequent times.
And her reason for doing that was?
So, this will sound familiar. 20-something, no job, no purpose, no direction. What are you doing? Where are you going? Are you going to college? Are you going to get a job? What are you going to do?
Yeah,
I don't know.
That describes all of 4chan now. You can't do that. All 4chan would be living underneath a porch.
Who knows? They might be.
But back in the 80s, that wasn't as acceptable.
No, certainly not.
So, was there a point at which Oakland started to turn around?
Yeah, about the time that I stopped driving.
So this would be late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah. The particular drug dealer died. There was a massive funeral in his honor that started from the housing projects, and there was this funeral procession that worked its way all the way up East 14th Street. This is in the papers. If you go digging in the Oakland Library or in the Oakland morgue of the Oakland Tribune, you can pull up these stories. It's probably online somewhere. Huge funeral procession. And the thing that made the establishment people, the wealthy people in the city, most indignant is that he could afford to buy a funeral plot in Piedmont in their cemetery.
This is beginning to sound like the funeral scene from Truck Turner.
Could well be.
But so the rich people decided they'd had enough?
Well, no, I think the fact that this guy died and his control over things went with him disrupted things enough that the cops could get their hands on it and arrest enough people to shut it down.
Because by the time I moved to that part of the Bay Area in the mid-90s, it was still not as nice as it is now, but it was nowhere near what you'll see out of blaxploitation movies from the 70s and 80s.
I think the big thing that happened to Oakland is the dotcom boom and the explosion of real estate property values in the South Bay and in San Francisco. There is nowhere on the peninsula that is cheap. The cheap housing, the cheap commercial space was over in Oakland. So Oakland got gentrified because it was the only place where young professionals could find homes, rental or purchase, find homes and commercial property. The whole strip of cities, starting up in Richmond, California, then El Cerrito, Albany, Berkeley, Emeryville, Oakland, and on down, Milpitas and on down. That whole run of cities on the I-880 corridor became much more attractive. West Oakland in particular became extremely popular because it's got a BART station, and it's the last East Bay station before it heads under the tunnel. So if you were an up-and-coming dotcomer, you could get, relative to the Bay Area, really cheap property in West Oakland and not need a car.
Well, I mean, that was everywhere in the Bay Area. I know people who grew up in San Jose who remember the days when there were drug dealers and prostitutes out on El Camino Real, and nowadays that's all swanky, upscale, because all the Silicon Valley money is there.
Right. The dot-com money transformed the Bay Area, transformed Oakland.
And I'm not sure how much for the better it is, because, I mean, on the one hand, it cleared out a lot of sleaze and scum. On the other hand, it's expensive, it's congested, and in some ways the Silicon Valley idiots they're better, but they're still really annoying.
Choose your poison.
So all in all, you would not recommend cab driving to a pretty young 24-year-old?
There are so many things that you can do as a pretty young 24-year-old that you can keep your clothes on and your dignity intact. You have huge amounts of options, and you don't need to go get into the cab business.
Would you actually recommend it for anybody?
What's your tolerance for risk? How much of a gambler are you? How badly have you sunk yourself?
So it's really a last-ditch profession for last-ditch people.
Yes, and like anything else, there are some gamblers that go into the casino and come out with more money than they left, but that's the minority, and the casino really gets pissed off at them because they don't like that. They want to take your money. And the same is true of cab drivers. There are some cab drivers that do behave themselves and they do all the small business stuff, but that's not the majority.
And everyone who gets into it thinking they're going to be one of the ones that does it the right way.
Yeah, that lasts like a month.
And then surrounded by easy money and crazy people,
you join the crowd. You start doing the easy money and crazy people. What are easy money and crazy? Boy, in Las Vegas, the ways that you could lose that 12 hours worth of revenue, awesome.
So that's a definite thumbs down.
Definite thumbs down.
Well, any other colorful stories you want to tell us about your cab driving days before we call this a night?
No.
All right. Well, thank you for helping me talk sense into a young lady who's got some rather odd notions in her head about how she's going to make some money and keep her clothes on. Because she's doing this because she doesn't like the idea. She's currently a maid and she doesn't like it, and she thinks being a cab driver will be more money and more dignity.
No.
There's a reason that you never find cab driver cafes in Japan.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing some of the old stories with us.
You're welcome.
And we will get some similarly colorful stories on a different subject out of you at some point.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us, everybody. This has been Antidem and Psycho Dish. And we will see you on down the road.
Sounds good.